I never thought I'd be the kind of man who doubts his wife. After 23 years of marriage, I believed Emma and I had built something unshakable. But life has a way of shattering your certainties, piece by carefully constructed piece, until you're left holding nothing but fragments of what you thought was real. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday in September. I was reviewing the quarterly reports for my construction company when my phone buzzed with a text from David, my oldest friend and business partner. "Hey Jake, saw Emma having lunch at Le Petit Bistro yesterday. Thought you were both in Chicago?" I stared at the message, my coffee growing cold beside my laptop. Emma was supposed to be in Chicago with her sister Claire, helping her recover from hip surgery. She'd left 3 days ago, kissing me goodbye at the airport, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. "Just us girls for a week," she'd said, her smile bright and familiar. "Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone." My fingers hovered over the phone. The rational part of my brain searched for explanations. Maybe she'd come back early, maybe Claire was feeling better, maybe David had mistaken someone else for her. But something deeper, more primitive, began to stir in my gut. A shadow of doubt that would soon grow into something far darker. "You sure it was her?" I texted back. The response came quickly, 100%. "She was with some guy. Tall, gray hair, expensive suit. Thought it was a client of yours at first." The shadow in my gut twisted into a knot. We didn't have any clients matching that description, and Emma had never shown interest in my business dealings before. She ran her interior design firm, I handled my construction projects, and we met in the middle, sharing our successes and failures over dinner each night. At least, that's what I thought we did. I called Claire's house, my heart pounding as the phone rang. Her husband Tom answered. "Hey Jake. How's it going?" "Good, Tom. Is Emma around?" "Can't reach her cell." A pause. "Too long." "Emma? Isn't she in Atlanta this week?" "Claire's been asking when she's coming to visit." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white against the mahogany. "Right, my mistake. Got my dates mixed up. Tell Claire I said hi." I hung up before Tom could respond, before the tremor in my voice could betray the earthquake happening inside me. Atlanta. She'd told her sister she was in Atlanta. She'd told me Chicago. And now David had seen her at Le Petit Bistro, one of the most expensive restaurants in town, with a mysterious man in an expensive suit. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, meetings, phone calls, signatures on contracts, while my mind spun scenarios like a deranged spider weaving webs of suspicion. Who was he? How long had this been going on? What else had she lied about? That evening, I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together. The marble countertops she'd insisted on during our last renovation. The family photos on the walls, chronicling our journey from young newlyweds to established professionals. Our daughter Sarah's graduation picture from last year, Emma beaming with pride beside her. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt right. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and pulled up our bank statements on my laptop. The familiar routine of numbers and transactions offered no comfort as I scrolled through the past few months. Then I saw it, a series of charges from hotels I didn't recognize, cash withdrawals from ATMs across town, and recurring payments to a private phone number I'd never seen before. The bourbon burned my throat as I swallowed hard. 23 years of trust began to crumble like ancient pottery exposed to air after centuries underground. I thought about calling Emma, confronting her immediately, but something held me back. A lifetime of courtroom dramas and crime shows whispered in my ear, gather evidence, build your case, don't show your hand too soon. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Emma. "Miss you, honey. Claire's doing better. Should be home on schedule. Love you." I stared at the message, at the casual lie wrapped in terms of endearment, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, a living thing with teeth and claws, but now it was crystallizing into something harder, colder. More dangerous. "Miss you too," I typed back, each word tasting like ash. "Can't wait to hear all about Chicago." I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out an old business card. Michael Chen, private investigator. I'd used his services once before, vetting a potentially fraudulent contractor. He was discreet, thorough, and most importantly, he owed me a favor. As I dialed his number, I caught my reflection in the window, a man I barely recognized, older and harder than the one who'd kissed his wife goodbye 3 days ago. The sun was setting behind me, casting long shadows across our perfectly manicured lawn, and I couldn't help but wonder what other shadows were lurking in the life I thought I knew so well. The phone rang once, twice, then Michael's voice, Chen speaking. "Michael, it's Jacob Harrison. Remember that favor you owe me? I need it now." "And Michael? This needs to be handled with absolute discretion." The pieces were in motion now. Soon, I would have my answers. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I realized that what I really feared wasn't the truth, it was the question of what kind of man I would become once I knew it. The next 3 days became an exercise in controlled madness. I moved through our house like a ghost, touching the artifacts of our shared life with new suspicion. Every photograph, every memento seemed to mock me with possibilities I couldn't yet confirm but couldn't deny. The vintage wine rack Emma had insisted on installing last spring, had it been his suggestion? The new silk sheets on our bed, were they really just because she wanted to try something different? Michael Chen's first report arrived in my encrypted email at 3 a.m. I sat in my home office, the blue light of my laptop screen casting shadows across the walls, and opened the attachment with trembling fingers. The photographs were crisp, professional, damning. Emma leaving the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown. Emma shopping at boutiques I'd never heard of. Emma laughing over wine with a distinguished-looking man who matched David's description perfectly. Subject identified as Richard Blackwood, the report read. CEO of Blackwood Development Group. Multiple meetings observed over 72-hour surveillance period. Intimate behavior noted. See attached timeline and location data. Richard Blackwood. The name hit me like a physical blow. We'd met him at a charity gala 6 months ago. He'd been charming, sophisticated, everything I wasn't. While I talked about concrete foundations and zoning permits, he'd quoted poetry and discussed fine wines. Emma had been enchanted, but I'd dismissed it as simple social pleasure. What a fool I'd been. I opened the timeline spreadsheet, each entry another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Tuesday, Le Petit Bistro, 2.5 hours. Wednesday, Grand Meridian Hotel, 4 hours. Thursday, shopping at Lawrence Boutique, followed by drinks at the Sky Lounge. The precision of their movements felt like a perversion of the scheduling efficiency Emma had always prided herself on. My phone buzzed, another text from Emma, had a great day with Claire. She's making real progress. Miss you more each day. I stared at the heart emoji, remembering when such simple symbols had meant something real. Now each message was a masterclass in deception, layers of lies wrapped in digital affection. The timestamps on her texts aligned perfectly with the gaps in Michael's surveillance timeline. She was messaging me between her rendezvous, probably lying in his bed while typing her false declarations of love. The bourbon bottle on my desk was emptier than I remembered, but the pain remained sharp, undiminished by alcohol. I pulled up my company's project database, searching for any connections to Blackwood Development. Nothing direct, but there were overlapping bids, competing proposals. Had she been feeding him information? Was this industrial espionage wrapped in a veneer of passion? My cursor hovered over Emma's contact photo, a candid shot from our anniversary dinner last year. Her smile seemed different now, tinged with secrets I was only beginning to uncover. One call could end this charade. One confrontation could shatter this elaborate deception. But something deeper, more primal, held me back. The raw, animal part of my brain that demanded more than just answers, it demanded justice. I picked up my phone and dialed a different number. Harrison. It's 3:30 in the morning, David's voice was thick with sleep. I need everything you have on Blackwood Development. Every project, every bid, every whispered rumor in the industry. And I need it quietly. A pause, then, this is about Emma, isn't it? What did you find out? Not yet, I lied, the words ashen in my mouth. Just doing my due diligence. But David? Don't mention this to anyone. Especially not to Sarah. Our daughter. The thought of her finding out about her mother's betrayal made my chest constrict. Sarah had always idolized Emma, followed in her creative footsteps. Now she was building her own interior design career in New York, blissfully unaware that her role model was destroying everything we'd built. After hanging up, I sat in the dark, letting the silence of our empty house wash over me. 23 years of memories played through my mind like a corrupted film reel, each frame now tainted with doubt. How long had this been going on? How many business trips had been covers for assignations? How many client meetings had been stolen moments with other men? The sun was rising when my laptop pinged with another email from Michael. This one contained audio files, recordings from the bug he'd planted in her car. My finger trembled over the play button, knowing that some things, once heard, can never be unheard. Richard, Emma's voice filled my office, intimate and warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. We need to be careful. Jacob's not as oblivious as you think. I slammed the laptop shut, but not before catching Blackwood's rich, cultured laugh. My dear, from what you've told me, your husband wouldn't notice if we danced naked in his office. Besides, everything's already in motion. Just stick to the plan. The plan. Those 3 words echoed in my skull like bullets. This wasn't just an affair, it was something bigger, more orchestrated. The pieces were there, scattered like evidence at a crime scene, the overlapping business interests, the suspicious financial transactions, the careful choreography of their meetings. I reopened my laptop and began a new document. At the top, I typed, the plan to destroy Jacob Harrison. Below it, I started listing everyone I could trust, everyone I could leverage, every resource at my disposal. By the time Emma returned home, I would have my own plan, one that would make their carefully constructed scheme look like a child's game. The rising sun cast long shadows across my desk, and I caught my reflection in the window again. The man looking back at me now had steel in his eyes and ice in his veins. Emma thought she was dealing with the same trusting husband she'd been manipulating for months. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. My phone buzzed one final time, coming home tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. Love you always. I smiled as I typed my response, and for the first time since this began, the smile reached my eyes. Safe travels, sweetheart. I've got a surprise waiting for you. There's a peculiar clarity that comes with complete betrayal. The morning Emma was due to return, I stood in our master bathroom, studying my reflection with the detached fascination of a man observing a stranger. The face looking back at me bore the topography of sleepless nights, valleys of shadow beneath my eyes, the weathered plains of my cheeks carved deeper by new knowledge. But it was my eyes that held my attention, they had transformed into something harder, like amber fossils preserving ancient predators. I adjusted my tie, Italian silk, one of Emma's Christmas gifts. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was dressed in the trappings of her deception, wearing the costume of the man she wished I would be. The fabric felt like a noose, a reminder of every carefully crafted suggestion she'd made over the years. Darling, you should dress more professionally. Sweetheart, let's work on your wine knowledge. Each recommendation now revealed itself as a comparison to Richard Blackwood's polished sophistication. My phone vibrated, a text from Michael Chen, subject be making moves. Large wire transfer initiated. Details incoming. I smiled, a cold expression that would have startled our dinner party guests from just months ago. Those transfers were exactly what I'd been waiting for. While Emma thought I was sleeping in our bed alone, I'd been laying a different kind of foundation, one made of financial tripwires and legal landmines. The doorbell rang, echoing through our too-quiet house. Sarah's old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, no relation to Michael, stood on our porch, clutching her weathered leather briefcase. At 72, she cut an unimposing figure, but her reputation in financial forensics was legendary. She'd helped take down 3 Fortune 500 CFOs before retiring to teach music. "Jacob," she greeted me, her eyes sharp behind bifocals. "I reviewed everything you sent. It's worse than you thought." We settled in my home office, spreading documents across the mahogany desk where I'd first read Michael's surveillance reports. Mrs. Chen's arthritic fingers danced across spreadsheets and bank statements with the same precision she once used to demonstrate Chopin. "See these transactions?" She pointed to a series of numbers that had meant nothing to me before. "They're beautiful in their complexity. Your wife and Mr. Blackwood haven't just been planning to destroy your company, they're attempting to orchestrate a complete takeover. The affair is just camouflage for the real operation." The revelation should have hurt. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, completing a picture I'd been staring at too closely to recognize. Emma hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd weaponized it, turned our intimate knowledge of each other into ammunition for a corporate coup. The project bids, the delayed permits, the suspicious inspections, I mused, seeing the pattern emerge. They've been systematically undermining my company's reputation while positioning Blackwood Development to swoop in and save our major clients. Mrs. Chen nodded, a teacher pleased with her students' progress. But they made a mistake. These offshore accounts, they're traceable. And the timing of certain transactions coincides perfectly with your company's confidential bid submissions. Industrial espionage is still a crime, even when it's wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the evidence file we'd compiled. It was enough to destroy them both, professionally, legally, personally. But mere destruction wasn't enough. I wanted them to experience the slow, exquisite unraveling of everything they thought they could control. "What's our next move?" Mrs. Chen asked, her voice carrying the same enthusiasm she once used to discuss finger positions and tempo markings. Before I could answer, my phone lit up with Emma's message, "Just landed. Can't wait to see you, darling. I've brought you something special from Chicago." Chicago. The lie felt quaint now, almost childish compared to the sophisticated deception we'd uncovered. I typed back, "I have something special for you too. Hurry home." Mrs. Chen gathered her documents, pausing at the door. "Jacob, remember what I taught Sarah about performing Beethoven? It's not just about hitting the right notes, it's about controlling the emotional crescendo. Don't rush this." After she left, I moved through our house one final time, touching the evidence of our shared life. Family photos that now felt like crime scene photographs. The vintage wine rack that had been his suggestion. The silk sheets that had been her preparation. Everything in our home had become a prop in their elaborate performance. I poured myself a glass of the Bordeaux Emma had been saving for our anniversary. The wine was complex, expensive, probably another of Blackwood's recommendations. As I savored it, I pulled up the email I'd prepared days ago. One click would send evidence of their conspiracy to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the SEC, and our company's board of directors. My finger hovered over the button as I heard Emma's key in the lock. The sound of her heels on the marble foyer, the rustle of her designer clothes, the soft humming of a woman who thought she was still in control of her narrative. "Jacob? Darling? Where are you?" I didn't answer immediately, letting her anticipation build. In the silence, I could hear her moving through the house, her footsteps carrying a rhythm of confidence that was about to miss its next beat. In the office, sweetheart, I finally called out, my voice a perfect mask of normalcy. Just finishing some work. How was Chicago? The door opened, and there she stood, my wife of 23 years, the architect of my intended destruction, looking fresh and polished despite her supposed cross-country flight. The afternoon sun caught her wedding ring, sending prisms dancing across the wall. I wondered if she wore it during her meetings with Richard, or if she had developed the habit of slipping it off, leaving a pale band of skin as the only testament to her vows. I brought you something, she smiled, reaching into her bag. What a coincidence, I replied, my finger still hovering over the send button. I have something for you too. The moment stretched between us like molten glass, delicate and dangerous, ready to either crystallize into something beautiful or shatter into 1,000 cutting edges. Emma stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, her silhouette a perfect composition of elegance and deceit. How strange that betrayal could wear such a lovely face, could move with such fluid grace as she crossed my office to kiss my cheek. Her perfume washed over me, not her usual scent, I noted with clinical detachment. This was something newer, more expensive, probably chosen with another man's tastes in mind. The fragrance carried notes of jasmine and something darker, more exotic. Like her lies, it was carefully layered, designed to intoxicate and distract. I missed you, she murmured, her hand resting on my shoulder. The weight of her touch felt like a brand now, marking me not as beloved but as deceived. Her wedding ring caught the light again, and I wondered if she saw the same symbolism I did, a perfect circle of promises, now warped into a geometric representation of infinite betrayal. How was Chicago? I asked, my voice a masterpiece of casual interest. Claire must be recovering well, if you had time for so much shopping at Lauren's boutique. The subtle shift in her posture was fascinating, a microscopic tensing of shoulders, a nearly imperceptible pause in her breathing. I'd spent 23 years learning to read her body language, and now I was using that intimate knowledge to watch her lies unravel in real time. Lawrence? Her laugh was pure crystal, practiced and perfect. Darling, I was in Chicago, remember? Though I did do some shopping for you. She reached for her bag, but I caught her wrist, gentle but immovable. That's right, you were in Chicago. Except Claire's husband Tom thinks you're in Atlanta. And David saw you at Le Petit Bistro. And the Grand Meridian security cameras caught some very interesting footage. I released her wrist, noting how she didn't immediately step back, still confident in her ability to control the situation. You've been busy, Emma. Very busy. The transformation was subtle but profound. Like watching a time-lapse of frost forming on glass, I saw her warmth crystallize into something colder, more calculated. The loving wife persona cracked and fell away, revealing the strategist beneath. You had me followed. There was something almost admiring in her tone, as if she was pleasantly surprised to discover this hidden depth in her supposedly simple husband. I had you investigated, I corrected, savoring the precision of the words. There's a difference. Following suggests aimless pursuit. Investigation implies purpose. Discovery. Like discovering how you and Richard Blackwood have been systematically attempting to dismantle my company from the inside out. Now she did step back, but not in retreat. It was the movement of a fencer creating space for the real battle to begin. Richard told me you were smarter than you let on, she said, dropping all pretense of denial. I should have listened. Yes, you should have. Just like I should have listened years ago, when you started subtly critiquing everything about me. My clothes, my manners, my business practices. You weren't trying to improve me, were you? You were cataloging weaknesses, identifying pressure points for future exploitation. I pulled up the financial documents on my laptop, turning the screen toward her. It's beautiful work, really. The parallel accounts, the shell companies, the carefully orchestrated accidents at my construction sites. You turned our marriage into the perfect cover story for corporate espionage. Did you choose me for this, Emma? Was I always meant to be the foundation you'd eventually undermine? Her silence was answer enough. She moved to the window, her profile sharp against the dying light. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new tone, not the warm honey of her deceptions or the cold steel of her initial defense, but something more complex, almost wistful. You were safe, she said, each word precise as a scalpel. Solid. Dependable. The perfect camouflage while I built something bigger. And yes, at first, that's all you were. But there were moments, Jacob, real moments. Days when I almost gave it all up because what we had seemed enough. Almost, I echoed, tasting the bitter poetry of that word. But not quite. Tell me, did Richard help you realize your true potential? Did he promise to transform you from a mere interior designer into a real power player? Her laugh was different now, sharp, genuine, dangerous. Oh, Jacob. You still don't see it, do you? Richard didn't transform me. I transformed him. This was my plan from the beginning. He just provided the resources, the connections. The man's ego made him the perfect instrument, just like your trust made you the perfect cover. The admission should have been another wound, but instead, it filled me with an almost euphoric clarity. I opened my email, the one with all the evidence attached, and began typing a new recipient address. What are you doing? For the first time, I heard a thread of uncertainty in her voice. Adding Richard's wife to the distribution list, I said casually. Caroline Blackwood sits on the boards of 3 major banks, doesn't she? I'm sure she'll be fascinated by these offshore transaction records. Almost as fascinated as the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Emma moved with the liquid grace of a striking serpent, but I was already standing, the desk between us. You wouldn't, she said, but her eyes had locked onto the screen, calculating angles and possibilities just as she'd calculated everything else in our life together. The woman I married wouldn't have believed me capable of this, I observed. But you're not her, are you? You just wore her face, borrowed her warmth when it suited your purposes. So yes, Emma, I would. In fact, I already have. Her composure cracked then, just for a moment, like fine porcelain showing its first stress fracture. What do you mean? I turned my laptop to show her the sent folder, time-stamped 10 minutes before she arrived home. Did you really think I'd wait until now to make my move? That I'd risk giving you a chance to delete files or warn Richard? Everything's already in motion, Emma. The only question is whether you want to be ahead of the blast radius or caught in the center of it. She sank into the leather chair across from my desk, and for a moment, I saw something achingly familiar in her face, a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But then her features hardened into new lines, revealing the stranger who had lived behind that beloved mask. What do you want? She asked, her voice steady despite everything. I leaned forward, letting her see the full transformation in my own expression. I want you to understand something, Emma. You chose me because I was safe. Solid. Dependable. You're about to discover just how dangerous those qualities can be when they're turned against you. The sun had set completely now, leaving us in the artificial glow of my desk lamp. In this light, we were both reduced to shadows and sharp edges, stripped of the comfortable illusions we'd lived with for so long. And in the darkness gathering around us, I saw the first glimmer of real fear in my wife's eyes. She had taught me well, though she didn't know it yet. All those years of watching her perfect manipulations had been an education in the art of destruction. Now it was time to show her exactly how well I'd learned her lessons. The following days unfolded like a masterpiece of destruction, each moment a carefully orchestrated movement in a symphony of retribution. I watched from my office as Emma's carefully constructed world began to splinter and crack, fault lines appearing in the polished facade she'd maintained for so long. The morning headlines screamed of financial irregularities at Blackwood Development, while federal agents descended upon their corporate headquarters like ravens to carrion. What fascinated me most was the elegance of her unraveling. Emma didn't break, she deconstructed, piece by precisely calculated piece, each layer of her deception peeling away to reveal deeper complexities beneath. She moved through our house like a ghost in designer clothes, her presence both ethereal and somehow more substantial than ever before. In her downfall, she achieved a kind of dark authenticity that had eluded her during all her years of pretense. "You're enjoying this," she observed one evening, catching me watching her as she poured herself a glass of wine, the same Bordeaux we'd shared during our confrontation. Her hand didn't tremble, and her voice carried no accusation, only a sort of professional admiration. "I never knew you had this in you, Jacob. All these years, I thought I was the only one wearing a mask." The truth of her words settled in my chest like aged whiskey, burning and warming simultaneously. "Maybe you taught me too well," I replied, studying the way shadows played across her face. All those years of subtle manipulation, of careful orchestration, they were quite an education. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face into something both familiar and alien. "We could have been magnificent together, you know. If I'd recognized your potential earlier." "We were magnificent," I corrected her, feeling the weight of 23 years pressing against my words. "Just not in the way you wanted. Not enough for your ambitions." The silence between us hummed with unspoken possibilities, alternate timelines where our marriage hadn't become a battlefield of hidden agendas and calculated betrayals. But those possibilities were as insubstantial as morning mist, evaporating in the harsh light of reality. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael Chin, Blackwood cracked. Full confession. Throwing EC under the bus. EC Emma Collins. Her maiden name reduced to initials in an investigator's shorthand, like a suspect in a crime novel. Which, I supposed, she now was. I watched her reading her own messages, noting the microscopic tells that betrayed her processing of information, the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible change in her breathing pattern. Richard was betraying her, just as I'd known he would. Men like him, men who built their empires on others' foundations, always chose self-preservation when the walls began to crumble. "He was never going to choose you over his empire," I said softly, not trying to wound but simply stating a truth we both knew. "Men like Richard Blackwood don't sacrifice themselves for anyone." Her laugh was crystal sharp, cutting through the tension. "Oh, Jacob. You still think this was about him choosing me?" "I chose him. I selected him as carefully as I selected you, each of you serving your purpose in my design. He was never meant to be my salvation, he was meant to be my ladder." The admission should have surprised me, but instead it felt like confirmation of something I'd always known on some deep, instinctive level. Emma had never been anyone's victim or pawn. She had been the grandmaster all along, moving pieces across the board of her ambition with ruthless precision. "And now?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she viewed her position in this endgame we were playing. She set down her wine glass, the movement deliberate and graceful. "Now I understand something that took me 23 years to learn. True power isn't in the manipulation, Jacob. It's in the ability to stand in your truth, even when that truth burns everything to ash around you." I found myself nodding, recognizing the echo of my own recent transformation in her words. The irony is, you could have had real power here. Legitimate power. We could have built something together that would have dwarfed anything Blackwood could offer. "Perhaps," she conceded, rising from her chair with fluid elegance. "But I didn't want to build something with you, Jacob. I wanted to build something of my own, something that proved I could orchestrate not just interior designs, but entire lives." She paused at the door, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light. "The tragedy isn't that I failed. The tragedy is that I succeeded too well, and taught you exactly how to destroy what I'd built." As her footsteps faded down the hall, I opened my laptop to review the latest developments. The evidence we'd compiled was overwhelming, not just of corporate espionage and financial fraud, but of a conspiracy so intricate it had taken root in every aspect of our lives. Emma had woven her ambitions into the very fabric of our marriage, turning intimate moments into strategic moves, transforming trust into a weapon. Tomorrow, the final pieces would fall into place. The FBI would formally announce their investigation, the SEC would freeze assets, and Caroline Blackwood would file for divorce, taking half of Richard's empire with her. But tonight, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself to mourn, not for the marriage I'd lost, but for the realization that its very foundation had been built on shifting sands of deception. My phone buzzed again. Dad? Mom's not answering her phone. Is everything okay? Sarah's text glowed on the screen, a reminder that the blast radius of Emma's ambitions extended far beyond our marriage. Tomorrow, I would have to tell our daughter how thoroughly her mother had orchestrated our family's unraveling. I poured myself a measure of bourbon, watching the light fracture through the crystal tumbler. The man reflected in its amber depths was neither the trusting husband I'd been nor the ruthless strategist I'd become. He was something new, forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by the cold satisfaction of revenge. The game wasn't over yet. Emma had taught me too well for that. In the chess match of our dissolution, every move had consequences, and the final pieces were still in play. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations, its own strategic necessities. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what we'd lost, what we'd gained, and what we'd become in the process of destroying each other. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but no one tells you about the frost that forms inside you while you're waiting for it to be served. As I sat across from Sarah in her favorite cafe in Manhattan, watching my daughter's world fracture and realign, I realized that victory tastes different when it's seasoned with the salt of your child's tears. How long? Sarah's voice carried the weight of collapsing certainties. How long have you known, Dad? The morning sun filtered through the cafe's windows, casting prismatic patterns across the untouched croissants between us. Such a mundane setting for the demolition of a daughter's fundamental truths about her family, her childhood, her mother. Long enough to ensure the truth couldn't be buried, I answered, watching her hands clench around her coffee cup, her mother's hands, with their artist's grace and architect's precision. Long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest acts of love look exactly like destruction. The news had broken spectacularly that morning. Emma Collins Harrison, celebrated interior designer and secret architect of one of the decade's most sophisticated corporate espionage schemes, was facing federal indictment. Richard Blackwood had turned state's evidence, his testimony a masterpiece of self-preservation that painted Emma as the puppet master who had orchestrated their entire operation. She was teaching me, Sarah whispered, and I heard the deeper betrayal in those words. All those mother-daughter design consultations, the carefully curated advice about building her career, how much of it had been genuine maternal guidance, and how much had been Emma grooming another piece for her grand design. Your mother. I paused, searching for words that could bridge the chasm between truth and comfort. Your mother loves you, Sarah. In her way. Perhaps that's the one true thing in all of this, her love for you was real, even if the framework around it was built on lies. Like her love for you? The question struck like a precision blade, finding the one spot in my armor that remained vulnerable. No. What she felt for me was different. I was her first project, her proof of concept. She learned how to orchestrate lives by orchestrating mine. But you were her masterpiece, the one pure thing she created without ulterior motive. Sarah's laugh was bitter coffee and broken dreams. How can you be so calm? She destroyed everything. No, I corrected gently, she taught me how to rebuild. Your mother was a master of transformation, she just never expected her greatest student would be the man she married. My phone hummed against the table, another update from Michael Chen. Emma had surrendered to federal authorities an hour ago, maintaining her composure even as they led her away in handcuffs. The image was already circulating online, Emma Collins Harrison in Chanel, her head held high, somehow managing to make criminal detention look like a society event she'd chosen to attend. What happens now? Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. I studied my daughter's face, seeing echoes of both Emma and myself in her features. The strength that had allowed her mother to orchestrate empires. The resilience that had helped me survive their collapse. Now we learn who we are without the scaffolding of lies. Now we build something real. The truth settled between us like settling ash, coating everything in a film of transformation. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, the first real contact we'd had since I'd begun explaining how thoroughly her mother had deconstructed our world. I always wondered, she said slowly, why Mom pushed me so hard toward corporate design work when I wanted to focus on residential projects. She was positioning me, wasn't she? Another piece on her board. My throat tightened. Sarah. No, Dad. I need to understand. I need to see the whole pattern, even if it hurts. In that moment, she was so much her mother's daughter, the same unflinching determination to face truth, no matter how brutal. But there was something of me in her too, a solid core of authenticity that Emma had never quite managed to acquire. Your mother once told me that true power isn't in the manipulation, I said carefully. It's in the ability to stand in your truth, even when that truth burns everything to ash around you. I don't think she understood the real meaning of those words until now. My phone lit up again, a message from Emma herself, somehow sent from custody. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. Not for what I did, but for not seeing that she was already more powerful than any of my plans for her could make her. I showed Sarah the message, watching her absorb these last words from the mother she'd known, this first communication from the mother she was only now beginning to understand. She'll never change, will she? Sarah asked, but it wasn't really a question. No, I agreed. She'll adapt, evolve, transform, but at her core, she'll always be the woman who saw life as a series of strategic moves, relationships as pieces to be positioned. The difference is, now we see her clearly. Now we choose our own positions. The sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning's soft shadows. Outside the cafe, New York continued its relentless pulse, indifferent to the small apocalypses occurring at its tables. Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that had stopped trembling. I have clients to call, she said. Projects to either salvage or surrender, depending on how tangled they are in Mom's web. I stood with her, recognizing in her practical focus the first steps of her own transformation. You don't have to do it alone. I know. She hugged me, fierce and quick. That's the difference between us and Mom, isn't it? She thought being alone made her powerful. We know better. After she left, I lingered at the table, watching the city's glass towers catch and reflect the sunlight. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Emma was probably already planning her next move, her mind spinning new webs from the threads of her unraveled schemes. Richard Blackwood was likely ensconced with his lawyers, bargaining away pieces of his empire to save himself from imprisonment. And here I sat, surrounded by the ruins of a life I'd thought I understood, feeling strangely, savagely alive. Emma had wanted to teach me about power, about manipulation, about the art of strategic destruction. Instead, she'd taught me something far more valuable, the raw, unstoppable force of authentic survival. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from David, board meeting in an hour. They're voting to approve the merger with Carlton Construction. Your company's going to emerge stronger than ever. I smiled, thinking of Emma in her cell, discovering that her greatest failure had been underestimating the power of the simple, solid foundation she tried so hard to undermine. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't in destroying your enemy's creation, it's in taking what they tried to destroy and building it into something far greater than they could have imagined. Standing, I left enough cash to cover our untouched breakfast and stepped out into the Manhattan morning. The future stretched before me, not as a strategic board to be manipulated, but as a canvas for authentic creation. Emma had taught me the art of destruction. Now it was time to master the art of rebuilding, not in her image of calculated perfection, but in the messy, genuine reality of truth.